everybody, welcome to number 7 in the 2022
It is
reading
July.
videos. It is now time for July. Do I kick things off this time? Are you kicking things off this time?
I can kick things off this time.
Alright.
So we're gonna do Dark Ages. It is a Marvel title by Tom Taylor, and it is again, Elseworlds is a DC thing, but it's just my thing now for it's an alternate universe.
Oh,
where,
so it's also an alternate universe.
Yeah,
okay.
it's an alternate universe where Cataclysm hits and Apocalypse and a bunch of other schmucks are in charge of some terrible stuff. A lot of heroes have died, and now they just want to make all of those things permanent. So whatever remnant of the world's heroes are left begin to try to sort of like fight this thing. And so I do appreciate when Marvel does these kinds of things. It was cute. I liked it. Is it something that I would collect on my shelf? Probably not. But yeah, if you like alternate Peter Parker stories and he's got kids and you don't know what happened, like the major draw,
and you don't know what happened,
because the major draw for these kinds of things is what happened to everyone else. That's sort of what
No, I can,
you know what I mean, like that's the draw. It's like in this particular thing where everything got screwed up, the Easter eggs of what happened to, you know, what the well-known superheroes and even world events is what is, you know, interesting.
Okay.
So there's that, and that was cute. Actually, that's the only one. Everything else I liked. That's the only one that's worth
Okay, well, I guess it's my turn.
mentioning. Everything else is just like, hey, this is kind of cool.
All right.
So
well, I guess I can take over.
Yeah,
I have a whole manga section, again, because I read a lot of manga also. We're going to start with Fiancee of the Wizard, Volume 1. This is by Masaki Kazuka, and the original story is from Shiori Nakamura. So this is the cover. You can see why I was drawn in. Basically, it's about this daughter of nobility named Philomena, I want to say, and she wakes up and she realizes she was reborn into a world of sorcery. She thought that meant she was a chosen one, because, like, you know, it's the typical, like, what is it, isekai?
Isekai, yes.
The typical isekai, but she's not. She's basically just destined in this world to be the fiance of this young kid who is actually going to be a wizard. I wanted to like this more than I did, and unfortunately it was just okay, and I think part of that is just because I find the wizard dude character so frustrating. Like, I am not against a stoic character who doesn't know how to express his feelings, but like this was particularly frustrating to me in that the girl tried so hard. Like, she really did. She did everything she could think of. She went above and beyond, and like the guy is kind of, he reciprocates her feelings but doesn't know how to do that well, and it was very frustrating for me to read. So like for me, this is like one of the ones where I'm like, I think I don't have to continue the rest of it, because I feel like I would just be very frustrated if I kept going and it was the same thing over and over again. Then I read Spy Classroom, which is by Sue Kanami. The original story is by Takemachi, and this is the cover. Basically, there is a main character named Lily, and she is so determined to become a master spy and help bring peace to the nation that she's part of, because everyone is at war. She's given an offer to join this like elite squad, and she gets really excited about that because the elite squad is tapped for missions that are like deemed impossible missions. But then she finds out when she shows up for like the first day of training that she's technically with a squad of like washouts. So basically they're all basically Spy Academy washouts, but they each have some sort of potential, and the guy, the master spy who took them all under his wing, named Klaus, he sees that in them, and so it's sort of the beginning, I guess. It feels like the beginning of a training montage. Like, we're not quite there yet, but it's the beginning of a training montage, if that makes sense. I'm mildly interested in this one, not one that I'm rushing to pick up the rest of, but definitely more interested in continuing this one. And then I decided to hurt myself. I mean, sure, because like, you know, that's typical in this household.
No,
and I finally read the complete manga collection of I Want to Eat Your Pancreas, which is a very strange title, obviously. It's basically about a high school boy who finds his classmate's diary, where she is basically writing about her journey while she's dying from a pancreatic disease, and he's the only person outside of her family who knows the truth. Nobody else does. And the thing about this is, like, I knew I would like it, even though it's tragic, and then while I didn't necessarily love it as much as I've loved other tragic stories in the same vein, I do think like it was just a very compelling thing where I just couldn't put it down. Like, I just kept wanting to turn the page to see what happened, how it would all end, even though I kind of knew where the ending was gonna go. Yeah, it was really very good. I'm glad I finally read it. I've had it for years, and this is like the only time that I read it, so that was good. And then I read the first volume of Living Room Matsunaga-San, which is by Keiko Iwashita. This is about Miko, and she ends up moving into a boarding house, and she's sort of learning how to live a life away from her family and her parents. They had her move into the boarding house because they had to move away to take care of her grandmother. And so she's learning how to be a grown-up and, you know, live on her own, but she's also developing relationships with all the other residents in this boarding house. And this is delightfully charming. Like, I'm excited to continue the rest of the series. I haven't committed to it yet because I have so many mangas that I still need to read that I own. But this is definitely one where I'm like, yeah, the minute I have an availability in my manga reading schedule, as if that actually exists, I would definitely read the rest of this. And I also know it's a finished series, which makes it even better because there's an actual endpoint in sight.
Even better.
Oh, and then I read The Abandoned Empress, which is by Ina, and the original story is by Yuna, and I love this cover. I'm not gonna lie, it was really the cover that drew me in. But basically, the main character, her name is Aristia, and she was brought up all her life believing she was the child of prophecy. Like, she was supposed to be the wife of the future emperor, and then all of a sudden she isn't. Because the real child of prophecy shows up, and then she immediately gets cast aside. And she actually, what happens is she actually gets sentenced to death at some point due to some manipulation on the part of the court. But she gets reborn in her 10-year-old body, and so she's going to forge an entirely new path for herself. It kind of has the same vibe as Villainous, except that it's darker in tone overall. But I really like this one. Like, I was so surprised because I was like, ooh, I don't know how I feel about this whole premise. But right now I'm just like, okay, I can see the potential for this to be one where I really like am invested in the outcome and seeing if she succeeds in like reshaping her entire life instead of being the child of prophecy. It's so convenient if you're reborn and you remember your past life and how you would end up if you did all the same things. So I am interested in continuing this one as well and seeing where it goes. And then I finally read a book, or no, a graphic novel that Kristen has been after me to read for like years, I tell you. I finally did it. I read the first volume of Lore Olympus, which is by Rachel Smythe.
Ooh.
This is the pretty Illumicrate edition with the Umber Spade dashes. Anyway, this is basically a modernized retelling of the Hades and Persephone.
Ah, yes.
Not even the myth, it's just basically it takes the Greek pantheon and puts them all in a modern setting, gives them more modernized personalities, and you sort of see how romance, or not romance, a relationship begins between Hades and Persephone. You also get greeted by all these other gods and goddesses, and it is so fascinating. I'm always interested in seeing how other people interpret Greek myths or or figures in Greek myths, and I think that what she's done here is very different. Content warnings, because there's a bunch of things that happen here that are obviously questionable and
it's
not
Greek
right,
gods.
and it's Greek gods, which is unsurprising. Yeah, it's beautifully illustrated. I love the color scheme for it. I do think that the plot is compelling, and I'm very excited to continue reading on. I actually have already read volume 2 as well, and I also really like that one. I'm running out of like breath. Oh, I reread The BFG by Roald Dahl this month. That was our family book club read. And it's so fun revisiting that story. I don't think it quite registered as a child how dark that is, actually, because this is about giants that eat children. Like, and they talk about it in detail. And I'm like,
sure.
I honestly think I would have rated this higher if we were talking about like past me. And like as an adult, I'm kind of like, okay, I still like it, but it's also heavily leaning on the nostalgia, I feel, because I grew up on Roald Dahl books. Like that was what I read over and over as a kid, and I will always feel a sort of a kinship with the whimsy and the imagination. There are definitely some things about this where I'm like, ooh, that's a little squicky how you portrayed that. Not just the whole like giants eating children, but even the racial profiling sort of in the story.
Yeah,
I wasn't very fond of. But it was a fun trip down memory lane, and I enjoyed listening to the audiobook too, because that made the experience a little bit different for me. I also read The Fine Print, which is by Lauren Asher, and it's the first book in her Dreamland Billionaire series. And this is another one where the romance setup is just like something right up my alley. So basically there are 3 brothers, and they're set to inherit part of their grandfather's huge estate because he's basically like Walt Disney, and he owns all of these things. But the catch is that they each have to fulfill a certain condition before it can be given to them. So one of the brothers, his is that he has to take over as creative director of the theme park and like find a way to improve the park. That's the whole premise of it. And so he obviously has to do this, and he's very reluctant about it because he's like, he feels like he's being judged by his father for his creative pursuits when he was younger, and so he feels very like vehemently like he has to prove he's ruthless at business and can be sort of like the dad. And he crosses paths with a literal ball of sunshine named Zara, who is like, she is literally sunshine personified. Yeah. And she is so passionate about like doing things that are helpful to other people, or like being very imaginative and creative, because then he hires her to become part of the team that like brainstorms new ideas for anything at the park, basically like a creative engineer. And there's also chemistry between them, so that's a thing. This was so much fun. I don't think the writing is the greatest I've ever read, honestly, but overall it was very enjoyable. Like, I had a good time. I honestly laughed out loud quite a few times, and I did get a lot of feelings for the main couple. I was rooting for them to like get their happy ending. The latter part of it feels a bit rushed, especially the resolution to like the conflict and like the relationship. But at the same time, I was like at a point where I was like, I just really wanted something that would bring me joy and comfort, and this was the perfect balm for that. So
perfect.
Can't say I regret reading it. And then I read Hunt of Shadows, which is a sequel. This is the sequel to A Trial of Sorcerers by Elise Kova, second book in the series, even better than the first. Like, I like the first a lot. The second book is the one that cemented my, like, I need to know what happens next in this series. It was well-paced, there were twists and turns. I enjoyed seeing Ira grow as a character and watching her form new relationships with new people. There's also a ship that has not sailed yet that is killing me slowly because it hasn't sailed yet. Who knows if it's gonna sail, let's be real. Can you tell I'm kind of bitter about this?
Tell us how you really feel.
Yeah, slightly bitter. The next thing I read was a pirate book, Crossbones by Kimberly Vale. It's the first in the Kingdom of Bones trilogy. This book is basically a dream setup for me because it obviously is about pirates, and the entire plot begins when the Pirate King dies. And it begins to start at the trials because he has no heir, and so it's a competition in order to see who's going to wear the bone crown and become the next king or queen.
The bone crown.
But there is much more to it than that, because there is also a magical thing going on where it could spell the end of the world as they know it.
Sure.
Which I don't think anyone wants. And so there are a couple of perspective characters in this one, and they end up eventually converging at some point, which we can't talk about because spoilers. It's a pretty slow start because you're introduced to all these different characters and you kind of are given the chance to get to know a little bit more about them and their history. But once you are sort of familiar with them, and once we get to the part where the tournament actually starts, things did pick up. It also ends on a pretty satisfying note where you could actually treat it as if it's a standalone. However, there are some loose threads which I think would be served well by a sequel, which obviously this is getting because it's a trilogy, so I probably will pick it up, though I won't be in a hurry to do so because I do feel like this one ends on a very satisfying note. A slight shift in a fantasy tropes or fantasy beings.
Sure.
I read a fairy book. So These Hollow Vows by Lexi Ryan has been getting a lot of buzz since last year. This is a girl who ends up going into the world of the Fae to rescue her sister, and she ends up somehow involved in the court intrigue between the two opposing rival enemy courts in the Fae Kingdom. The thing about this one is that a lot of people are raving because of the romance, right? I feel like the only reason I can't say I love it as much as other people is that I generally like the characters, but I didn't feel like I was personally invested in the outcome of either of their stories or the romance, which is surprising since that seems to be the thing I hear the most about when it comes to this book. The romance for me was actually one of the elements where I felt like it was fine, like it was there and it was fine. What actually held my attention was that the story itself was compelling, especially as the lore continued to expand in it. Like, even if I could sort of guess like a certain direction things would take, even though I sort of knew how it was going to end, I kind of had an inkling from the start, and I was like proven right at the end. I didn't mind that too much because she constructed it so well. Like, it felt really organic when things would unfold and get revealed, and I really like the lore part of the story. I think that's always going to be what appeals to me the most. I haven't yet read the sequel / finale, but I will be doing so. But I am glad that I ended up enjoying These Hollow Vows pretty much just as much as I anticipated, though I still don't understand why everyone loves the romance, since that is really not the key thing for me.
I mean, people will love what they love, right?
It's true. I mean, I'm glad for you if that was the thing that you loved about that book.
Whatever works.
Before I turn things over to Mackie, since he's probably going to be talking about this series, I want to talk about Preludes and Nocturnes, which is the first volume of the Sandman graphic novels, comics, yeah. Sandman comics. Novels, yeah. I actually read this years ago, and I borrowed it from the library. And the reason I picked it up again is because the Sandman series is on Netflix. I have not finished watching it yet, but I will be doing so. It's funny because reading it now is different from when I read it the first time, and I think it might be primarily because I have read more since the first time I read it, but also the genres that I've been reading in or watching on TV shows has also expanded.
Broadened,
and doing that helped make it even more enjoyable than the first time I read it, despite the fact that it's still super dark and disturbing, and also kind of leaves me like...
Disturbing? Really? The Sandman? Is there anything disturbing about the Sandman?
I mean, Neil Gaiman is just one of those storytellers, and I say storyteller because that's really what he is.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Like, he just has a gift where his concepts are so unlike anything I really encountered, even if he's using familiar touch points.
Yep, that's a great way to put it.
He has a very unique perspective or a unique sort of plot in mind, and that it plays out. And that, as an end result, makes everything so interesting. The characters, the plot, the themes. And so when I read Preludes and Nocturnes this time, I was like, oh, this is so fascinating. And you'll eventually see in July, like it led to, not July, in August, that it eventually led to me going down a spiral where I was like, oh, I'm gonna keep reading this series. But yeah, Preludes and Nocturnes was such an interesting experience this time around. I did really enjoy it the first time, but like this time around definitely had more of an impact, so very excited.
Impactful.
All right, I'm gonna take a break from talking now so Maki can talk a little bit.
So, a couple of things before I do end up going to my little Sandman foray. Buffy the Last Vampire Slayer by Cassidy Gilly is a thing. It just came out.
What does that mean, the last?
I know it. So in the vein of like Old Man Logan, right?
Oh.
Or Old Man Hawkeye.
Oh.
It's Buffy
That's what that
at
means.
aged like, I don't know, 70, 90, I don't even keep track. Was it the Buffy from the spin-off, well not from the reboot? I almost don't know. I probably think it is. But I just like the idea of, again, the draw here is, well, what happened to everybody else when you do sort of like a fast forward dystopian sort of like version of things. And it's set in a sort of like a world where
Buffy.
vampires have sort of taken over-ish as well. There's a truce now to the whole thing, and Buffy's just, again, she's the last Slayer, and she's trying to figure out her life throughout that whole thing. Did I like it? Yeah, I did, actually. If this is truly a spin-off of the reboot, then this is the first reboot-related thing that I really, really, really liked. That was clearly a reboot thing, rather than, for example, the series of old Slayer stories.
Oh yeah.
Right, which could either, could be either universe. So there's that. I did also read The Sandman, but via audio.
I really want to experience that, but I wanted to read it first in the graphic novel.
Yeah, this is the one where James McAvoy plays
exactly why
Dream. This is where Kat Dennings plays Death. And again, the only thing I have to say about this is Neil Gaiman handpicked Kat Dennings specifically. Kat Dennings also said in several interviews when Neil approached her was, do you remember what I sound like? And apparently Neil did and does. And my humble take is that if Neil put his stamp of approval, then he clearly has imagined Death to be whatever it was that Kat Dennings has done, which is, there's levity when it's Kat Dennings. There's lightness. I would like to venture that Death's kind of perky.
She does seem like the perkiest.
If not in looks, because she's obviously like a little goth girl, but in 100% vibe. She's like the perkiest goth girl you'll ever... Like, she's not all... You know what I mean? Like, she's not all dark and like brooding. She's the exact opposite. She's like, get off your ass, be a grown-up. Oh wait, I was wrong. Right? And so that dry sarcasm that Kat Dennings is a master class at works very well. And so I appreciated the Sandman sort of like story. They got grade A voice actors on this thing. David Tennant is in there somewhere.
I really want to hear it.
So you know what? If you're a fan of the Sandman and you're not gatekeepery in any way, form, or fashion, and your mind is open, go for it. It's beautiful. So there's that. Which leads me to beautiful, open-minded things, because you need to have an open mind if you're me. On a lark, back last year, they said you should try the Court of Thorns and Roses, just for the fun of it. And I thought, it's Fae. I don't like Fae. I still don't. But
let's explain how you got
You
back.
hear that, Kristen? I still don't. Anyway.
Let's explain how we got back here. So, rewind a little bit. Maki starts reading House of Earth and Blood.
Which
and of course, me
took
being
me
me, like
8 million tries.
as a throwaway comment, I was like, oh, before you continue that, I think you should read A Court of Thorns and Roses.
And in my head, I'm like, all right, fine.
I mean, it was partly so he would read A Court of Thorns and Roses, but, it was also partly for reasons.
Because Sarah J. Maas, honestly, the more you read Sarah's books, the more you sort of get acclimatized to her style.
Yep.
And part of the reason that it took me 8 million years to even get Crescent City started was because I couldn't finish, I just couldn't get through it. But then I finished the Throne of Glass series, that was fine. And then I hear that House of Sky and Earth, or whatever that was, Blood?
House of Earth and Blood.
No, the second one, the Sky
House
and
of Sky and Breath.
Was longer, and I'm like, crap. And so they're like, you gotta read everything. Just get acclimatized to it. I'm like, fine. And so here it is, Court of Thorns and Roses. And I did not expect
I'm still laughing.
two things I did not expect. I did not expect to love it this much. And I did not expect to see this much graphic. Chapter 55, I think, of book 2 should explain everything that I'm talking about. I'm used to sort of bifurcating the found families that I love and the kind of like torrid sort of like stories that can exist. I mean, I love Kushiel's Dart. I'm no prude to these things. It's just, I reserve the fandom. Like, just imagine, here's the thing, I also don't read fan fiction. I was about to say, look, imagine Percy and Annabeth in a really torrid, that's been written down. That has been someone somewhere
I would not personally
has
read it,
written
for
the
me,
porniest version.
Yeah.
I mean, no, it'll be like them at age like 22. You know what I mean? It'll be that kind of thing. But it's one of those things where, because I love characters so much, they're like family, so I do not need to know that much about their anatomy. So I was not prepared.
I'm sorry, that's funny to read.
I was not prepared. In my head, like, basically, for those of you who know, I'm basically Azrael throughout this whole thing, making noise
For
on the
now,
way
you're
into
Azrael.
the house. Until I'm not. Because there's the idea of, I love you all, I don't need to see that. I don't. I really don't. I support it. I recommend you do it as often as you can and want, and for everybody else's enjoyment except mine. So that's just me and my issues, to be honest. Like, and here's the thing. Crescent City's pretty graphic too. I didn't care. Bryce and Quinlan is not my family. But everyone that belongs to a specific court
Is now your
of Fae is my family. So please, I don't need to, I'm leaving the room. Like, or at least saying I'm in the room so they can stop. And here's the thing. It's very meta. It's very meta because that's how they feel about each other. Thank you very much. So this is not about being a prude at all. It's about, like, I don't need to see that.
In summation, Mackie read the Court of Thorns and Roses series, and it is now his favorite Sarah J. Maas series
of all time. Which is not to say that I did not enjoy these two giant books now that I have been thoroughly educated with sort of like Sarah's writing style, her sort of like world building, which is really, really cool. I enjoy these very, very much. I am so glad.
Second favorite, I'm guessing.
I'm also like dying to know what happens
Me
next.
too. I'm actually really like, I want to know what happens.
I am 16 million times invested in figuring out what the hell happens after this particular book.
Same.
Because holy crap, and I'll leave it at that, because spoilery, here we are. There's no Sarah J. Maas book that I have not read anymore except Catwoman. In her worlds. And I'm in it for the long haul, so paint me a fan. I'm rooting for Sarah, who does not give, she doesn't care. She's gonna do whatever the hell she wants, and I respect that so hard. Do I agree all the time? No, but
you respect it.
800%. She's just like, So, that's what I read in July.
Okay, 2 more series for me. First is the Bargainer series, which is by Laura Thalassa. This consists of Rhapsodic, A Strange Hymn, The Emperor of Evening Stars, and Dark Harmony. The Emperor of Evening Stars is a novella. So, this series centers around a siren named Calypso Lillis, Callie for short. She... How do I say this without spoiling the entire plot? Okay, at the beginning of the first book, she has been collecting this bracelet of black beads that goes all the way up her wrist. It's basically magical IOUs that she contracted with a guy called the Bargainer, and he hasn't called in any of those favors yet, but she owes him a lot of favors. At some point, he shows up back in her life again, and he needs to start calling in some favors.
It's crazy, all right.
Because something is happening in his world where Fae Wars are going missing. Women come back, but they're all in a glass casket, and they're all bearing children. There's like a whole like thing with like an evil being awoken in his world, and so he needs her help and to sort of uncover that. At the same time, there's obviously some serious chemistry between those two. And it kind of goes from there. Here's the thing about this series. I'll preface this by saying, like, at the beginning I was kind of skeptical because they meet when I think Callie's like 16, which in this world is like adulthood if you are a paranormal creature. And they start getting to know each other when she's 16. So for me, I was kind of like, 16 and he's like an immortal. He's like hundreds of years old. Kind of weird. I mean, like, granted, she's already older by the time they meet again. I think she's like 23, 24. So I'll just throw that in there at the beginning. This series also gets pretty dark, so do check content warnings for certain things in it. They're a little spoilery, but I will say, I actually enjoyed the series more than I ever imagined I would. And a lot of that has to do with the fact, like, annoying nicknames aside, he calls her Cherub. I don't like that nickname. Annoying nicknames aside, I really was rooting for the two of them and their relationship. Like, I like them both as characters. I enjoyed Callie, I enjoyed the Bargainer. I enjoyed seeing them together and their dynamic as it develops throughout the course of the series. I really like that a lot. The story is also super compelling. Like the plot is well constructed, the lore is well constructed. Everything really builds and builds until it escalates into that final book where everything goes down, basically. I like it because each book has its own set of stakes, and the stakes of the next book always sort of draw from whatever the result of the first, like the previous book's problem was. It's just so interesting. It's such a rich world. The characters are so well done. Like, honestly, there's nothing I can say about this one, like, except praise for the most part, except for that one thing I mentioned, which is I really don't like that nickname. This is an example too of like a series where there's romance in it, and it leans heavy on the romance, but it also doesn't detract from the actual plot and like the things going on outside of that. Like, there's so much stuff that Callie and the Bargainer both have to face and to do in the series, and just because they're also exploring the romantic tension between them, it doesn't really take away from the rest of that, which I really like too. So yeah, so glad I finally read the series and that I had a good time with it. In a complete contrast in tone, we're now going to really talk about A Sign of Affection, which is by Sue Morishida, co-writing author duo. So basically, again, it's about a college student named Yuki. She is deaf and communicates primarily through sign language, and then she has a chance meeting on a train where she gets a crush on the guy that she meets on the train, and the series sort of explores how their relationship develops and how they learn to communicate with one another.
That's cute.
And honestly, it's so great because it's like one of those series where it's like slice of life and nothing high stakes or too terrible happens. Like, which
is kind of the point.
Like any sort of conflict that pops, there are conflicts that pop up, sure, but they get resolved pretty quickly. Like, there's still obviously some relationship things that need to be navigated both separately and together, and I'm just like, it's so delightful. Like, I have such a delightful time reading this. I just always feel very happy when I finish a volume of the series. So I'm really excited that there's another slice of life manga I love. The only unfortunate thing is that this is an ongoing series, so I have to keep waiting for installments.
Right.
The 5th installment came out, I want to say June or July, maybe?
Sure.
And the next one comes out next May. So the gap is hurting my soul a little bit.
Yeah,
but you know, I will suffer it because I enjoy Yuki and Itsuomi and their relationship so much.
Yeah.
So it's a great series. I would highly recommend checking it out. And now we've come to the end of the July installment of these videos. We hope you enjoyed it. If you have any feelings, questions, comments, concerns, just want to say hi, leave a comment down below, and we'll see you guys soon. Bye!